With the chair, the debate is terminated.
Mr. Speaker.
Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When we think about why...
Point of order, Louise Upston.
Mr. Speaker, my recollection was that you would terminate the debate.
No, I terminated the speech and I've done that. Grant Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, there has been a history in this House prior to the last 10 years where there was an unlimited time for consideration by select committees of bills. And clearly that could see bills languish for a significant period of time in a select committee without any particular timeline or process for them to come back to Parliament. Then about 10 years ago, I'm informed by colleagues, the ruling around, the practice around a 6-month timeline was instituted. Now this is a pragmatic balance between getting bills through and also giving the public and parliamentarians time to look at them. We all know that the standard period of consultation for public submission is around 6 weeks. That's a reasonable length of time. There are occasions when holiday periods appear and that causes some difficulty within that period of time, but a 6-week period for public submissions to be gathered is regarded as normal practice, Mr. Speaker. So then that sets the bare minimum time that is, in fact, from my perspective, acceptable for most pieces of legislation. To have this instruction, Mr. Speaker, for there to be only less than 4 months for a bill means that having got what I suspect on this particular bill will be a large number of submissions in a 6-week period, the committee will then be heavily restricted in the way that it can address those submissions. And we have seen in other bills, Mr. Speaker, where there are restricted periods of time for the committee to consider those bills. We have seen people reduced to 5 or 10 minutes when they're making a submission on what can be complex legislation. And so a 6-month period of time, the normal period of time for a piece of legislation, gives the committee the ability to both hear from the public, take the advice that they need from the officials who are around them on complex matters. That means often a toing and froing about that advice, and restricting, as this motion does, to 4 months or less, actually will limit the ability of the committee to properly consider the public submissions, properly consider the advice that they are getting from their officials, and in the end, does Parliament no service, Mr. Speaker, to have a situation where on a complex and important matter a restricted time frame like this is provided. Now there may be good reason for, from time to time, truncated select committee processes. But we should move very warily into that, and as my colleague Mr Mallard says, none has been provided to us in this debate, where we find a good and constructive reason that across the House we can agree would support something such as a motion as this, to restrict it to 4 months or less. So from my point of view, Mr Speaker, the standard process, the idea that we have a 6-month period, is one that should be protected where possible. It is in part to protect the rights of the public to be heard properly, and there will be significant submissions on this bill, as there are on most bills of this nature. And by truncating to less than 4 months, I fear, Mr Speaker, we will be doing a disservice not only to ourselves in Parliament, but to the industries that are covered by this bill, to the people who will want to make submissions on this bill. If the government wants to put motions like this, as they did last week and as they are doing this week, they have to provide good reason. Because on this side of the House, we will stand up for a process that has history, that is robust enough and long enough for the public to have their say, and is robust enough and long enough for parliamentarians to do their job properly in a select committee of analysing submissions, analysing evidence, analysing advice, and then reporting back to this House a bill that is the kind of legislation New Zealanders would expect us to pass. We know from experience that takes, for most bills of this type, 6 months. It's not less than 4 months, and I find the phrasing less than 4 months interesting. It's a minimalistic view of the fact that hopefully it might be 2 or it might be 1. The reality is that if we keep it where possible to 6 months, committees will work in short order when they know that there is an important issue in place. But by setting an arbitrary time like less than 4 months, I believe the government is doing a disservice to this piece of legislation and a disservice to Parliament. And I think it's very important, Mr Speaker, that we have debates like this to let the government know that if it's going to step outside of normal practice, it must provide good reasons for doing so. And I think in this case the government has failed that test, Mr Speaker, by simply arbitrarily saying less than 4 months. They are clearly setting up a process here that will limit public submission and that will limit the ability of parliamentarians to give scrutiny to the legislation, which is the heart of the Select Committee process. Mr Speaker, I have only been a member in this Parliament as an opposition member, and I can say that in those Select Committee processes where they go the full 6-month period of time, or we at least have that capacity to go that period of time, we make better law. That's what I have observed, that we make better law when we allow the Select Committee process to take its course. We do not set arbitrary limits, particularly around legislation where there is a significant amount of public interest, where there are a significant amount of submissions, and where there are complex matters that will require advice from officials and indeed perhaps from beyond the officialdom in the case of this piece of legislation. So, Mr Speaker, I won't take much more time, but I do think it's important to note that this is not a frivolous debate. This is a serious debate about whether or not Parliament should step outside of its normal processes that have been developed over a number of years to ensure the public have their say and to ensure that parliamentarians perform the role that the public expect of us. If we are being expected in this House to deviate from that, we need good reasons. We have not been provided with those good reasons, and we will debate these motions out because the government cannot just ride roughshod over the practices of this Parliament.
Mr Speaker.
Louise Upston.
I move that the question be now put.
The question is that the question be now put. Those of that opinion will say aye. For the contrary, no. The ayes have it. Ayes have it. Party votes called for. I'll ask the clerk for a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party. 11 votes opposed. New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Māori Party.
3 votes in favour.
Mana. 1 vote opposed. Act New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Any other votes?
Members, the ayes are 64, the noes are 54. The question will be put. The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion will say aye. To the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Party votes called for. I'll ask the clerk for a party vote.
New Zealand National.
59 votes in favour.
New Zealand Labour.
34 votes opposed.
Green Party. 11 votes opposed. New Zealand First.
8 votes opposed.
Māori Party.
3 votes in favour.
Mana. 1 vote opposed. Act New Zealand.
1 in favour.
United Future.
1 in favour.
Any other votes?
Members, the ayes are 64, the noes are 54. The motion is agreed to. Call on Government Order of the Day number 2.
Student Loan Scheme Amendment Bill, 3rd reading.
Speaker.
The Honourable Phil Heatley.
Speaker, I move that